y esta vez nos toca enrumbar hacia Pucallpa, donde unas extrañas luces de colores han aparecido en las noches sobre los caseríos de San Juan y San José, causando zozobra y miedo en la población. Algunos aseguran que son extraterrestres que vienen para raptar gente, otros que son los causantes de algunas extrañas desapariciones, bautizándolos como los pelacaras.
Porque antes les vamos a informar que, ¿se acuerdan este tema de esta tribu Iquitu, de compatriotas en Iquitos, que asumía que lo que los molestaba, los perturbaba, eran extraterrestres? Bueno, la Fiscalía investigó y concluyó que los supuestos extraterrestres que arrebataban a pobladores iquitos no eran más que mineros ilegales que buscaban amedrentarlos con drones. Así se reveló este misterio de los llamados pelacaras.
Number 2, these are not miners. These are not river miners. Forget it. Absolutely not. They're not miners. They're also not narcos. They are not drug traffickers. This operation is much too complicated. The technology is much too advanced. We are not dealing with illegal miners, river miners, or drug traffickers.
Bueno, hoy voy a hablar de un tema que me da muchísimo, pero muchísimo miedo. Es abrir la ventana a un lado de la ufología que es muy oscuro y muy asqueroso. Hoy vamos a estar hablando de los pelacaras en Perú. Desde mediados de junio más o menos, un montón de personas de las comunidades indígenas de toda la región de Pucallpa y un montón de lugares aledaños que recorren el río amazónico del Perú comenzaron a reportar que había seres vestidos de negro que viajaban en discos metálicos que abducían a las personas o las hacían desaparecer y luego se las encontraba en el medio de la jungla con la cara pelada al hueso, blanco. Claramente tengo fotos y videos, pero YouTube no me los deja mostrar, así que voy a dejar un link al post de Reddit en el cual yo me estoy basando en la estructura del video.
Necesitamos apoyo para nuestra comunidad. Los niños, mira, se ve, los niños no duermen, están ahí las madres desvelándose, señores. Son extraterrestres estos señores, son vestidos con blindados, son tipo del hombre verde que persigue al hombre araña, igualitos, son señores. Yo 2 veces y no caen, en vez de que caen se elevan y se desaparecen, señores. Por favor, necesitamos apoyo el día lo más pronto posible para que vengan a reforzar nuestra comunidad, vengan a sacar a esta gente de acá que está haciendo a que nuestros hijos, nuestras señoras, ¿no? Nuestra familia no se duerman, están desvelándose en una casa, cuidando, comiendo, no comiendo, señores, pero estamos atemorizados por lo que está pasando en nuestra comunidad.
Ante los constantes pedidos de auxilio, agentes de la Policía Nacional del Perú junto a miembros de la Marina se aproximaron al lugar de los hechos para realizar las investigaciones correspondientes. Luego de investigar varios días, las autoridades manejan varias hipótesis para explicar lo sucedido. Señalan que los verdaderos responsables serían miembros de organizaciones criminales, como narcotraficantes, traficantes de terrenos o traficantes de diferentes índoles. Otra de las teorías que se manejan es que los seres extraños no serían más que drones cubiertos con telas y máscaras para asustar a la población por parte de mineros ilegales en busca de ahuyentarlos de la zona.
Y está bien, yo te lo puedo aceptar todo lo que quieras la hipótesis de los oficiales, pero a mí me gustaría que veamos un testimonio. Un investigador, escritor, youtuber, no sé bien cómo describirlo. Se hizo un viaje con un compañero hacia la zona donde esta gente está diciendo que está pasando estas cosas, les llevó comida, recursos y también los entrenó militarmente para que puedan patrullar de una manera más efectiva la zona y grabó claramente todo el encuentro.
Una adolescente logró escapar de estos supuestos seres y terminó con un pequeño corte en el cuello.
No le van a agarrar. Talía. Reacciona, hija. Talía.
Toma tu tiempo, yo sé que es difícil. It's extremely traumatized, this girl.
She just stood there and trembled. Head to foot, trembled. for probably a good 2 minutes, just stood there silent, trembling. She could not speak. Obviously something very traumatic had happened to her right there in the backyard where we were standing. What happened to Talia? What happened to this young lady is that one night, one evening, she was picking fruit from her tree. And this was right after dusk, so it just got dark. She's picking fruit from the tree. She's knocking the fruit down with this long stick, and the fruit falls to the ground. Talia proceeds to bend over and pick up the fruit that fell to the ground, and there are, under the tree, there are some dead leaves, and suddenly she feels this gust of wind behind her. And so she looks behind her, and what does she see? She sees a person coming up the hill, because the backyard is kind of a little gully. It's forested. There's some jungle there between the other houses. So it's this little gully. We have it on film. And she sees this guy, this person, this thing coming up the hill almost as if he's surfing on one of these circular platforms. And he comes up the hill and he lands next to her and then immediately grabs her. He seizes her from behind and he places his hand over her mouth. So he's got her from behind and he's got his hand over her mouth so she can't scream. Then she sees another one of these guys coming on another platform up the hill and lands and positions himself in front of her and grabs her leg. So now she is being held by two of these PELACARAS, face peelers, one behind her with the hand over the mouth and the other has her legs. The description she gave me of these individuals is identical to what everybody else was saying to us. They were dressed head to foot in black body armor. She even described the body armor in greater detail than anyone else. She described how it was on the forearms and on the shins, and the chest was some sort of like a breastplate, metallic, and they were wearing these helmets, these large helmets, elongated helmets. that covered the entirety of their faces. So the very same description that everybody else gave to us, this is what Talia encountered. They were very tall. One of them, which she calls the gringo, was taller than me, considerably taller than me. The other, I think she said, was about my height, if I recall. That one I dubbed the Peruvian. The reason why is because, according to Talia, these individuals spoke Spanish. The taller one, she says, spoke Spanish like me, like a gringo with an accent, and the smaller one spoke like a Peruvian. And I specifically asked Talia, the Spanish that this individual spoke, was there an accent? Was it Ecuadorian? Was it Bolivian? Was it Cuban? Or did it sound like Peruvian? Did they have an accent? She said he sounded just like all of us. So, we don't know if they're people. I'm not saying they're human beings. This is the testimony that Talia gave.
Es cuando los dos relatos, el de la policía y el de los aldeanos, tienen una diferencia abismal entre lo que creen que es. Pero sigan escuchando lo que le pasó a esta chica Talia, porque ahora se van a cagar. O sea, ¿por qué un minero o un drogadicto, vende droga, lo que sea, querría hacer esto?
So, these individuals have her in this manner, but they're hovering, mind you. They're hovering on these platforms, and they proceed to lift her up. Now, she was telling us something about how they attempted to lift her off the ground, but couldn't. Somewhere in the course of this encounter, they were attempting to lift her off the ground, and for some reason, they were having a hard time. So they took her behind this hut that's there on the property, and then they proceeded to take out a powder. The Peruvian put some powder in his hand, and then he put some cream. He had this little bottle with cream in it, and he mixed the powder and the cream together. Then he took a nasal syringe, he sucked up the substance and shot it up her nose. Then they took out a larger tube, almost like sort of like a large toothpaste. They put the cream on their hands, and this was the guy that had her from behind. So recall, the gringo has her from behind. He's covering her mouth. The Peruvian has her by the feet. And the gringo proceeds to smear this cream all over her face. And she said that her face instantly went numb when the cream was applied, and it began to swell. And she even tells us that at that point she heard the Peruvian guy say, be careful, don't apply too much. You're going to ruin the flesh. And then she later explained that what she heard them saying was something about how if they apply too much, the flesh is going to stick to the skin when they take it off. Something along those lines. It wasn't exactly clear, but something like that. And then, and I may be skipping some minor details, and then they took out one of them took out a small device that you and I think is a laser scalpel, and they began to make an incision in her neck. In other words, they were very likely going to peel her face off, just like the legends say. She began to lift up the mask, the helmet of the guy behind her, the gringo holding her from behind. And as she was doing this, somebody, I think it was him, or if not the Peruvian guy who was holding her legs, one of them slapped her in the face. And when they did this, they dropped her. And this gave her a moment in which her mouth was no longer being covered, and she was able to scream. So she hits the ground, she screams. Her brother and her family members are on the other side of the house on the porch, sitting there outside. They have their flashlights on them. Talia's brother gets on the scene with his flashlight. The neighbors are up higher on the hill. They come down with their flashlights, and they all see the same thing.
Después está el testimonio de este flaco que están viendo acá, que es un pescador en canoa. El chabón estaba yendo a mirar las redes a la noche, a levantarlas, y dice que de la nada se hace de día, que hay como un mega flash, y ve esta putísima cosa. Bueno, nada, lo dejo ahí para el que tenga ganas de prestar atención y ya termino con el video.
The fuselage of the craft is shaped somewhat like an acorn, with the narrow part being the nose and the wider part the aft. They're about the length of a private jet, but much wider, and in the place of wings, they have small, rounded protrusions which fold open and deploy a series of rapidly blinking lights. The craft have been viewed hovering above the village at very low altitude, some 30 to 40 feet, and have no apparent propulsion systems such as engines or propellers. In one case, the craft appeared to be completely transparent, and two pilots could be seen sitting inside. Like the circular platforms, the craft are completely silent, except when they accelerate, at which point they make a low-frequency humming sound.
Bueno, cabronazos, ahí tienen toda la información que pude socavar y poner en un video lo más corto posible. Me faltó agregar algo que era muy interesante, que es comparar el cuerpo mutilado del video ese, que les recomiendo que vayan a Reddit y lo vean bien, con lo que serían las mutilaciones de ganado y de vacas, porque de hecho el cuerpo tiene las mismas incisiones, tipo en los mismos lugares de la cara, que los que tienen las vacas, que aparecen mutiladas misteriosamente. Curiosamente ambos sin sangre, curiosamente ambos sin ojos, curiosamente ambos sin lengua, con toda la parte pelada al hueso. Bueno, nada, fíjense, este es un lado muy oscuro de la ufología y está bueno. Si tienen ganas de ver más, avisen, dejen ahí comentarios, me mandan un mail o me dejan un fax o no sé, por Fotolog, que yo es feo por reverse. Gracias.